big within Kenya, and the biggest culprit in our context is actually government. Basically, what is happening is that there is an investment towards supplying water to our taps, and according to the rules set within the ministry, everyone is supposed to make payment. Every user is supposed to make payment.
Okay. So, yeah, definitely. And Mr. Malesi is saying that the government is the biggest culprit.
Indeed. A study that we have done in partnership with the Water Service Providers Association has established that there is a whopping 2 billion debt that is pending to water service providers. This basically means that government institutions and departments are being supplied with water, they are using the water, but they are not meeting up their commitment to make the payment.
I mean, that is quite a hefty figure. How far does this go? How much? Okay, the much is in the billions, the 2 billion you've mentioned, but the debt, how far back does it run?
So there are historical debts, some of which come from the defunct municipal and county governments, but this just forms one proportion. Most of this is composed of recurrent bills, which are basically within the last 5 years or so.
Okay, so that is quite unfortunate. As a sector player, this particular debt that we've seen being accrued and by the government towards the water sector and water enterprises, what impact has it had on these enterprises, the suppliers?
I think the biggest impact is that it directly prevents the water service providers from being sustainable. And we are seeing quite a number of water service providers operating below their budget because they are not meeting their incomes, and they are largely depending on bailouts. Most service providers are in that situation. But to a broader scale, we are also seeing that the person who is supposed to be reached, that citizen for whom supply is supposed to be extended, cannot be reached because the water service provider cannot extend service due to these challenges.
Yeah, and I mean, is there progress? Because we've seen from the government side, this has always been the issue. And when we talk about recovery, earlier on, even the mitigations that were put to cushion businesses, part of it was, for pending bills to be paid to many enterprises that are owed. For the water sector, has there been a promise of fulfilling this bill? Have there been promises that have been broken?
So I think it varies from one service provider to the other because the debtors are also varied for each service provider, and there are different circumstances, including the owners of the water service providers who are the county government being debtors to their own companies. So there are elements where we are seeing a bit of reprieve over time, but we're also seeing some levels of bureaucracy within government that has then resulted to difficulty in making movement on this pertinent issue, especially because we are seeing, for example, I'll just give a specific example, that where there is an administrative shift, for example, in the National Police Service, where now they are saying individual police officers will now have to take care of their individual water bills, which is good. But then there is a lump of historical bills which are yet to be paid. Nobody is talking about these historical bills. So there are such examples, but it varies from one data to the next.
So moving forward briefly as we finish up, I mean, the solution, of course, is these bills being paid. But are there also other underlying issues, some things that we need to do to make sure that, you know, Kenyans are getting water at affordable rates?
Of course, within this period of the pandemic, the situation became much more dire because government stepped in quite positively, actually, to protect those living in very dire situation, and asked the water service providers to not to disconnect and to ensure continued service. But what we saw was that the failure to make payments also increased within this period of the pandemic. So one of the things that we need to see is the ministry in charge of water and sanitation stepping in much more, and Treasury also supporting the initiatives to make sure that the departments and agencies of government pay their dues in good time and completely.
All right, definitely. Thank you very much, Malesi Shivaji, CEO, KEWASNET, Kenya Water and Sanitation Civil Society Network, that we need to support our water enterprises, pay the pending bills. Let's take a short break right here in Business Today. We'll return with more.